Bob Arum, Hall of Fame promoter, says that Devin Haney versus Regis Prograis fight came back with disappointing numbers. He spits his truth. Roll the clip.
To become the undisputed, the fighter you promoted for a few fights, Devin Haney. He just had a resounding one-sided decision win against Regis Prograis. Seems like the entire social universe is talking about the pay-per-view numbers for that fight. And if there's anyone who's plugged into the pay-per-view industry, it's you, Bob. What are the numbers you're hearing for that fight?
Very, very disappointing. But again, you put a fight on. First of all, in December, pay-per-view. Now, what are people concerned about in December? Saving up their money so they can spend it on Christmas presents.
Exactly what I said. The holidays.
The pay-per-view is so expensive now that a lot of people who are looking to stretch their dollars to buy presents for their kids and relatives don't want to put it into buying a fight, particularly a fight like Haney, Regis Prograis, which is not a huge, once-in-a-lifetime attraction. And so the fact that it did very poorly is not really a reflection on, say, Haney's marketability. It's just a fight that took place at the wrong time against fights that were free to air.
What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. That was a Fight Hype interview. Link in the description. They did a brand new interview with none other than Hall of Fame promoter in boxing, Top Rank founder, Bob Arum. Terrence Crawford. So that was a brand new interview, again, from Fight Hype. Link in the description. And it says, the truth. Bob Arum gives the truth on Devin Haney. Quote, this is a direct quote. That's why Fight Hype put it in quotation marks, right? It says, gives his point of view on the disappointing pay-per-view buys for the Regis Prograis fight. He also explains why it did poorly. Wow. Bad news, not for me though. On my channel, I strive to give you guys credible, accurate, and reliable info. Now you have someone completely different. See, I get it. Rick Glaser said the numbers were low. People have different opinions on him if his numbers are accurate. Leonard Ellerby of Mayweather Promotions said that the Haney Prograis numbers were 50,000, roughly 50,000. And Devin Haney says, don't listen to that bald-headed uck about my numbers. He don't know ish. Now you have Devin's former promoter. He did 3 fights with Devin Haney. His very last 3 fights before the Regis Prograis. George Kambosos won in Australia, George Kambosos 2, and of course a pay-per-view with Vasily Lomachenko. And now Hall of Fame promoter Bob Arum is saying the same thing that Leonard Ellerby said. That the numbers were disappointing. That the pay-per-view numbers for that fight were not good. So I remember in my comment section, a lot of people, Ego's Army, they listened to my point of view regarding this matter and my thoughts. There were some naysayers and detractors who said, no, you guys are just Haney haters. Leonard Ellerby, he doesn't know. He had nothing to do with the promotion. These are the comments that people were saying, and they're saying, don't believe Ellerby. Now add to that list Hall of Fame promoter, Bob Arum. So you have the industry, two of the biggest promoters that have worked with the biggest cards. Leonard Ellerbe has been involved in Mayweather cards. We know he set all the records. Top Rank has had big cards with Miguel Cotto, Oscar De La Hoya, Floyd Zab Judah. They were a part of Floyd versus Manny Pacquiao. And now Bob Arum is saying the same thing that Leonard Ellerbe said. But the people told me not to believe my own intuition. They told me not to listen to Leonard Ellerbe. And now you have somebody else saying that the numbers aren't good. So, this is bad news. The bad news, the question still remains. I did a video about it. Make sure you guys check it. Rise Podcast, they posed a great question, I felt. If there's all this uncertainty about the numbers, and it's been maybe a week since that particular fight, Devin Haney and Prograis, what are the real numbers? Because now you have Bob Arum, Leonard Ellerbe, and others who are reporting that the numbers basically flopped or didn't do that well. You see it on the screen. Bob Arum, truth on Devin Haney, disappointing pay-per-view buys versus Regis Prograis. Explains why it did poorly. Now, the thing, Bob Arum, he didn't sound like he had rage. He didn't sound like he was hating on Devin Haney. He just spoke the information that he has. He said, one of the reasons why I think this fight did poorly was because you put it in December, which is right before the holidays. The great ego Stradamus strikes again. When I gave you my opinion of this whole debacle of numbers and where they're at, some people were saying it did better than Lomachenko and Devin Haney. You have the man who put on Devin Haney and Lomachenko, Bob Arum, which we'll get to in a second, and he's saying he has sources that said the numbers were disappointing and it performed poorly and it was low. And part of it, he said, is not necessarily just Devin Haney's like marketability, but you put it in December. And these are things that Eddie Hearn, being a UK British promoter, maybe he doesn't know. Maybe he doesn't pay attention to that because he doesn't really have a bunch of American stars and he doesn't have a bunch of American pay-per-views, right? Outside of Canelo. But Canelo don't really fight in December. And I think he did fight Caleb Smith in December, but most of the time he's fighting on the quote unquote Mexican dates of Cinco de Mayo and Mexican Independence Day weekend. So he doesn't really have that much experience in America with putting on pay-per-views in December, right? Except for maybe Joshua Ruiz. I don't remember. But again, that's a heavyweight fight. And it was Joshua's first fight in New York, right? So a little bit different. We're talking about smaller weight classes and Haney and Prograis. And Haney they had a good buildup, but Haney had to almost carry the promotion based on the fact that Prograis was coming off a bad performance with Zorilla. And at the end of the day, Prograis wasn't a huge name. That's literally what Bob Arum kind of said. He said, you're putting it before the holidays. People, the price of pay-per-views up. You have to worry about buying gifts for the holidays. It just doesn't scream and entice, oh, let me spend money on pay-per-view, because it's not a once in a lifetime event. Like Gervonta versus Ryan Garcia, it did great numbers. You guys can get mad when I give my assessments in the boxing game, but the great ego Stradamus always strikes again. You guys say I'm wrong in the comment section. Ryan Garcia and Gervonta Davis, they're like number 6 on the all-time grossing fights. So men lie, women lie, but numbers don't. So with Bob Arum pretty much joining the side of what Leonard Ellerbe said, this doesn't fare that well. Now, the usual suspects and the shapeshifters, for one, how come when news like this breaks, your boy Ego, I tell you, I'm fair, I'm objective. I look at all situations on a case-by-case basis, and I make my reports, right? I told you Gervonta was the A side, and Bob Arum is basically confirming it because Bob Arum is telling you the numbers also didn't perform that well versus Tank's last fight. He did 1.3 million, right? people wanted to debate this. They say, oh, how do you know Tank did 1.3? Bob Arum never came out and said the numbers didn't do 1.3 million. Eddie Hearn didn't come out and say, hey, I have secret information that Gervonta versus Ryan Garcia performed poorly, because he would have looked foolish if Eddie Hearn did that. He would look very foolish if he tried to say the biggest fight of 2023 performed poorly. So he didn't do that. But now when it comes to Haney versus Prograis, you literally have Ellerbe and Bob Arum, two of the biggest promoters that have put on big pay-per-views, and they're both saying roughly the same thing, that it did not perform well. And Leonard Ellerbe said, I think the people have determined the market value, and the market value for that fight was $50,000. Bob Arum said it performed poorly and disappointing. I mean, there's not much to read between the lines. The live gate was great. The atmosphere of the Bay Area for Haney Prograis was great. The buildup was entertaining, but that doesn't always mean it translates to pay-per-view. So I don't understand why so many people had such a hard time grasping this. I told you, if you know the sport, you know the business of boxing, the reality is the holidays, December is not typically the best time to put on pay-per-views. People getting ready for the new year. In addition to that, you have to compete and contend with Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, and Christmas and New Year's Eve. And, you know, people have time off from their school or jobs or whatever. You know, they're not necessarily all buying pay-per-views. So that's the reality of it. And now you have Bob Arum saying the same thing. Now, speaking of Bob Arum, I feel like another reason why Bob Arum particularly comes into play when it comes to this conversation is because Bob Arum promoted Devin Haney's last 3 fights. He did it himself, his company, Top Rank, 2 Kambosos fights in Australia and 1 pay-per-view with Lomachenko. So this man has an actual look, because people were saying, oh, Leonard Ellerbe, he had nothing to do with Haney Prograis. He doesn't have anything to do with Devin Haney, his career. So people said that Leonard didn't know what he was talking about, Ellerbe, by putting out the information that he put out. But one person who does have some data from Devin Haney's last 3 fights is who? Bob Arum, including a pay-per-view with Lomachenko. So he did the fight with Lomachenko on ESPN pay-per-view. I told you, another reason why I can picture that fight having stronger numbers. It was a big fight. It was a fight for undisputed. And it was also a fight where it wasn't in December, which I told you historically is not the greatest time for boxing pay-per-views, unless we're talking Wilder Fury, unless we're talking Pacquiao Marquez 4, you know, major fights like Bob Arum was saying. But in addition to all of these things, when we're talking about the Prograis numbers and the Lomachenko numbers, Loma has a bigger profile than Regis Prograis. They're both southpaws, but Loma is highly respected. He's on most people's pound for pound top 10, you know what I mean? Or some people's top 10 at least. He's number 1. They literally have, ESPN literally has Lomachenko number 1 pound for pound in the lightweight division right now. So he was a respected name for all the belts. And Devin Haney pushed him at the weigh-in. He hauled off and pushed him. So that had a lot of people talking. Devin's weight on the scale had a lot of people talking. And ultimately, it was a good fight with 2 bigger names, both Haney and Lomachenko. So it's not really surprising that DAZN, who's not a big app and application in America, and Prograis, who's also not huge and he was coming off a bad performance, could have possibly underperformed. Now you have Arum saying it, and Arum did Devin Haney's last pay-per-view. So people were saying Leonard Ellerbe was just hating. Oh, he was just mad and hating. Bob Arum didn't sound angry, and he said the same thing. So what's your excuse for what Arum is saying? Oh, is Bob Arum just hating? He has data and made money with Haney, and Haney was signed to him for 3 fights. So it's getting old, the people just saying, oh, you're on You're on TMT. You're on Tank's payroll. So is Bob Arum on Tank's payroll too? Because he's saying the same thing as Ellerby. And he's saying the same thing that Boxer Ego said. I told you I'm the greatest. I'm the best in the business. You guys got to make it make sense. And I can't wait. Like I said, when it comes to giving you all sides, I do that. There's nobody in boxing that does that better than me. I interviewed with Bill Haney. He said his piece about the numbers. I gave you my personal opinion on the numbers. I'm covering it when Bob Arum says something, when Ellerby says something, when Team Haney says something. I'm giving you everything in between. Notice there's a lot of people that defended the Devin numbers and the pay-per-view and said, oh, it really did great. You guys don't know. Where'd you get the number from? Why is everyone slow to react when Bob Arum is saying, I have the truth, and he's confirming what Ellerby said? Let me know that in the comment section. Since everybody's real, everybody's keeping it real, and everybody's fair and objective. Finally, the ego final thought is this. People like numbers this, numbers that, who cares? Now all of a sudden, the usual suspects, it switches to who cares about numbers? Make the fight. But that's not what you were arguing for. That's not what you were saying. And the reason why we care, because if the numbers don't jive, there is no fight. So you're only as good as your last performance, and you're only as good as your last stats. Gervonta Davis clearly is the A side because nobody really believes that the numbers were as strong as they were reported, or at least Bob Arum doesn't, a Hall of Fame promoter, and neither does Leonard Ellerby. So when we're talking, the reason why it matters is when we're talking about negotiations, both sides have to be on point, and the B side definitely has to be realistic. If these were your numbers, these are the numbers that are being reported. And now people want, oh, I want to see proof. I mean, you could do that with anybody. You could say, what's Canelo's numbers? How do we know Mayweather and Canelo did 2.4 million? Everything is a reported number. And again, if there's a dispute on the numbers, how come DAZN didn't put out a flyer or a graphic saying, hey, we did great in December, a hard time to historically sell in boxing. We did 500,000 pay-per-view buys. Eddie Hearn's literally on camera saying, we hope it does better than Lomachenko. And I believe he even said it did less than Lomachenko. I have to go look at that. And you have two top promoters, Ellerby and Bob Arum. They're all saying the same thing. So what do you believe? Let me know that in the comment section. I told you I was the best in the business. Then I showed you.